All right, Neil Ratner, Ratak here with a story. Today would have been Steve Marriott's 75th birthday. Now, Steve was a founding member of both the Small Faces and Humble Pie, and he's recognized by his peers as one of the greatest rock and roll singers of all time. Now, I went on tour with Humble Pie for a few weeks when I was special assistant to their manager, Dee Anthony. This was in the early 70s. And Steve and I partied together and got to know each other fairly well. And so today, I thought I'd tell you a few things about Steve Marriott that you might not know. And as usual, a little background first. All right. So in 1959, at the age of 12, Steve formed his first band. He was a big fan of Buddy Holly, and Marriott even took to wearing large rimmed glasses with the lenses removed, and he even made his bandmates call him Buddy. That's how much he was into Buddy Holly. Now, Steve's father, Bill, saw that his son had talent, and when he spotted an ad in a London newspaper for a replacement for the part of the Artful Dodger in Lionel Bart's musical Oliver, based on the Dickens tale Oliver Twist, he immediately signed Steve up for an audition. The only problem, he never told Marriott. All good, though. Steve auditioned, and he got a part in the show, playing various boys' roles. But Lionel Bart liked his voice, and so he was one of the boys. He didn't get Artful Dodger, but he became one of the boys. And he stayed with the show for about a year, and he even sang a couple of tunes on the album, including the song Consider Yourself. Now, it seems Steve was headed for a career as an actor, but not so fast. After a few more roles, Marriott became bored and decided to go back to his other love, music. Now, Steve and David Bowie were very good friends at the time, and the two even considered going on the road as an R&B duo called David and Goliath. And over the years, they helped each other out when each of their careers wasn't doing that well. But in July of 1964, obviously David and Steve didn't go out on the road as David and Goliath. And in July of 1974, Steve Marriott first saw his future Small Faces partners, Ronnie Lane and 16-year-old drummer Kenny Jones. Now, Lane and Marriott met again by chance. He had seen Lane and Jones play, but then later they actually met by chance in the J60 Music Bar, which is a music shop where Steve Marriott was working. Now, Lane came in looking to purchase a bass guitar, and afterwards, he was invited to Marriott's home to listen to Steve's extensive collection of rare R&B American import records. You know, the two got to talking. They liked the same kind of music. And Steve told Ronnie about his record collection. One thing led to another, and you can imagine. And with their shared love of R&B, soon Marriott, Lane, and Kenny Jones decided to form their own band, with Steve bringing along his acquaintance, Jimmy Winston, who was later replaced by Ian McLagan. Now, Steve's friend Annabelle came up with the band's distinctive name after commenting that they all had small faces. The name stuck in part because they were all, except for Winston, small. None was over 5'6" tall. And the term face in English mod culture, and Steve was a mod, was the name given to a well-known and respected mod. So Small Faces it was, and they loved the name, and they were very successful, you know. Marriott wrote or co-wrote most of the Small Faces hit singles. They were a very popular band. But after about 4 years, Steve got bored and frustrated. And at a New Year's Eve gig in 1968, he just split. He walked off the stage saying, "I quit." Marriott wanted a new band, and he also wanted to play with Peter Frampton, who had just left his band called The Herd. So that's exactly what happened. Steve approached Frampton, and then they got Greg Ridley on bass and Jerry Shirley on drums, and the band Humble Pie was formed. Now, according to Pie drummer Jerry Shirley, Steve specifically wanted to stand at the back of the stage and let Peter be the front man. He wanted us to be like the band. The band, where they're sharing the vocals and playing musical chairs instrument-wise. That's what Humble Pie were trying to do in the beginning. You know, just a little aside, I've told a lot of stories, and it's amazing how many groups used the band, Levon Helm and Robbie Robertson, and the band, as a model for what they wanted to do. Because the band was so integrated back then that each person took a major part, and there was no real frontman, backman, whatever. And they were a model for many other bands. Okay, now, after 2 albums and only moderate success, Humble Pie switched labels and signed with A&M Records. But more importantly, they switched managers and signed with my old boss, D. Anthony, which is how I got to go on the road with them. Now, D was something else. Trust me, I've talked about him. I've written about him in my book, Rock Doc. He was a trip, man, for sure. And he had a different philosophy, His idea was you had to tour relentlessly. And he planned to crack America that way. And he worked on their stage presentation. He moved Steve Marriott from the back to the front. And again, they toured relentlessly. And the strategy did pay off. In many ways, there was always this uncontrollable energy pent up in Marriott, waiting to get out. And in the end, he couldn't resist being the front man anyway. He loved it. Now, even Frampton was impressed, and according to Peter, it was something to behold. Imagine being in an audience and seeing a little white guy on stage, standing 4 foot nothing, and every time he opens his mouth, a black man's voice comes out, and he's got all this bravado that comes from who knows where. He'd sing instructions to them in gospelese. It was riveting. Now, Frampton left shortly after the recording of their live album, Performance Rock in the Fillmore in '71, which became the band's most successful release to date. Peter wanted to go in a less heavy direction, and he did. We know what happened with Peter Frampton. Humble Pie went on to record Smokin', a top 10 album, but by 1975, the relationship between Marriott and Dee turned sour, and that was the end of Humble Pie. Now, there are all kinds of stories about what happened between Dee and Steve, and I'm not going to go into them. But I will quote Jerry Shirley. There were recriminations, lots of finger pointing from Steve. Some of the stories about Dee are complete nonsense. There's been a lot of exaggeration. But it was a shame to see a great relationship between an artist and a manager break down like that. Did it break down because of money? It broke down because of cocaine. I could vouch for that. But cocaine and money are closely related. Steve had lost his marriage in '73, which devastated him. And there were huge amounts of cocaine, really, there were. Those were the real culprits, not D. Anthony. That's what Jerry Shirley had to say. And Steve was really never the same after that. He tried a reformed Humble Pie, did some solo stuff, and then in the early 90s, he was even planning a new album with Peter Frampton and had recorded some stuff in the U.S. But after returning home, arguing with his girlfriend, and drinking large amounts of alcohol, Steve ended up in bed in his home, passed out with a cigarette burning, and that was that. He died, the house burnt down. That was that. Unfortunately, another sad rock and roll ending, but that's the way it was. And at least there's a lot of good Steve Marriott music to listen to. All right. The late, great Steve Marriott. Happy belated birthday, Steve Marriott. Not belated birthday, but would have been his birthday today. At any rate, Steve Marriott, I feel very fortunate that I had the opportunity to hang with him and get to know him. All right, that's my story. Hope you enjoyed it. I'll have more stories as we go along. iHeartRadio, Radio Woodstock, Saturdays and Sundays at 3 o'clock. All right, that's it for today. And as I like to tell you, always remember to keep on rocking. All right. Bye for now.